A lot of people aren't really interested in politics, but who can blame them? It often feels like some kind of bureaucratic sport where teams compete to see who gets to beat the shit out of you in the most creative way. Hi, I'm a reporter, and this is Pathos Politics. Today we're talking about lobbying, and before we get into it, I want to warn you, if you don't know much about lobbying, then what you're about to find out will probably change your entire outlook on government and maybe even the world itself. It's probably one of those Eve eating the apple deals where you realise that everyone's naked. Kia's got no clothes. But what's the apple? To put it simply, we don't really live in a democracy. And not just since Starmer. This goes back to the Tories too. It does look a bit like a democracy and it sounds a bit like one, but it's not really one. If you look at public opinion compared to policy, you'll see what I mean. Yes, technically whichever party gets the most votes that gets them MPs will be the governing party, but that's like the absolute lowest bar. Because after that point they can pretty much sack off everything they've previously said and do whatever they fancy for as long as they can whip their MPs into line. That doesn't seem super like a democracy unless we keep some kind of incentive while they're in government to have them go through with the things they actually said they'd do to help the population. So, let's have a look at what their current incentives are. Lobbying is basically individuals, corporations or interest groups persuading politicians either financially with campaign donations or other amenities like presents or trips or studies. But if you're the one persuading politicians, aren't you sort of the one that's running the government? Ah yes, I can already feel the mistress of democracy slipping away. The word lobbying is believed to have come from people waiting around in lobbies outside of Parliament to meet politicians and have their say. It became pretty well known among the public for a while in 1994 when The Guardian broke a story we now know as the Cash for Questions affair, which suggested that famous Harrods owner and sex pest Mohammed Al Fayed had paid two Conservative MPs through a lobbyist to ask questions in Parliament for him, among other things. What followed were several lawsuits deciphering the nature of the lobbying. Since then, the public have quite rightfully had a distaste for lobbyists, so most have rebranded themselves as being in the business of public relations, public affairs, political consultancy or corporate affairs. This makes them a little trickier to spot, but you'll still find them if you know where to look. Lobbying can technically be done by anyone, and used to be done regularly by unions and charities, but these days it's mostly corporations or firms representing a range of corporations, which allows them a small layer of protection from public scrutiny, like a corporate condom. Dibs on that as a band name, by the way. If you've ever wondered why politicians are doing things that don't make sense to you, the reason is lobbying. It's why their promises at election time rarely get followed through on once they're in power. Robin Williams said politicians should have their donors on their suits like sponsors on NASCAR drivers. And I think he was onto something there. That way, when Starmer announces the prescription of Palestine action, you could see that speech was brought to you by Quadriga Capital, which owns significant shares in Israeli weapons companies. Lobbying has also got significantly worse in recent years. At the decision of a select committee in 2006 about modernising the parliamentary process, it was decided that Parliament would make itself more available to lobbying. This would be by distributing drafts of bills before they hit the floor to be researched and adjusted by the lobbyists. Now I don't know about you, but me and my mates don't get any early access parliamentary bills to give feedback on. The most we do is sign a petition, to which the government responds by saying "nice try buddy" and sending us on our merry way. To be fair though, not all lobbying is bad. It's also done by charities and unions which do represent real people that aren't in the top 1% of wealth holdings. For example, Greenpeace have gotten plastic microbeads banned in the UK in 2018, as well as getting coal power plants mostly phased out by climbing one in 2009. There are also a few workplace unions that have gained a few more rights in the past decade or so, but these changes are pretty slow and small when you think about the drastic change that is needed. Some early examples of good lobbying is, in 1842, the Early Closing Association lobbied for workers to have Sunday afternoons off. This would later end up becoming the weekend, but sadly that would take until the 1930s. The suffragettes also lobbied as well as more militant tactics. Change has been made possible for the people through these means, but often very slowly and through slight and incremental change, being made slower and less effective as time goes on. In the coalition government, David Cameron deemed lobbying the next great scandal waiting to happen. He knew something needed to be done. So they introduced sweeping lobbying reform at last. Except this reform mostly affected the efforts of smaller lobby groups like charities and unions we mentioned, and increased the power of corporate lobbyists. These laws range from lobbying organisations being on a register unless they're operating from within another corporation, to gagging laws forbidding small organisations from campaigning in the run-up to a general election, as well as preventing charities, academics and other grassroots organisations that are in the receipt of government money from attempting to influence government policy. So let me get this straight, the big brain academics aren't allowed a say in policy, but Mr. Moneybags McCorporate is. These corporate lobbyists aren't just hanging around in the lobby though anymore. They insert themselves into the lives of our politicians. They become their friends, their peers, their confidants, their golfing buddies, their holiday pals, their pedo party throwers. It becomes very easy for those politicians to know very few real people outside of politics or outside of their wealth class. It's very easy for them to not personally know any of the people who are actually going through the shit right now. So when the people try to tell their politicians what's really happening to them, the politicians almost don't believe it because they are shielded from seeing it. This is what I meant by most people hating politics. It doesn't make sense for most people. Why do these politicians rarely do anything that's actually good? When they do try, why does it so rarely turn out right? This is why. Corporate lobbying is why. Let's see some examples. You probably think politicians are pretty dumb for making laws that have so many loopholes. Inheritance tax, for example. If you give away stuff early enough or put it into some kind of farmland or trust, it can be avoided or reduced for the richest people. These kind of loopholes are indirectly written into laws by lobbyists so they can ensure the rich people are allowed to play by a different set of rules. Another example of a well-meaning policy that became corrupted, likely through lobbying, is the Online Safety Act. Yeah, fair enough, let's protect kids on the internet, but how did that end up becoming a law requiring so many sites with vaguely mature topics to force access to your data? Data that has already had a breach when this policy hasn't even been in place for a year at time of writing. Great British Energy, a nationalised renewable energy infrastructure proposed by Labour in their manifesto to lower energy bills. Turns out it's really just a new way to make it cheaper for corporations to set up renewable energy themselves that they get to keep selling at sky-high prices based on the market rate. The market rate is currently set by whichever energy generation is the most expensive. Oil and gas. But there are no proposed changes on how we calculate those, so we don't actually see any of the benefits of the cheap renewable energy production. This means the companies we subsidise rake in more profits as the electricity is so cheap to produce. So more corporations raking it in while we get beat up at the side of the court and forced to hand over more money. That's not to say renewable energy is bad, it is cheaper. Just that Labour are doing it in the least beneficial way for us. These examples are a perfect encapsulation of the failures of this corporate-owned government. They aim to do something that's actually good for the people. They realise the newspapers and the media will call them radical if they make too big of a change, so they water it down a bit. Instead of shooting for the moon, they aim for the edge of the atmosphere. Then the lobbyists come in and get into their heads, give them some misleading data, sow a few doubts, and help them come up with a brilliant idea of getting private corporations involved to help, for a significant chunk of cheese, of course. This means further watering it down and giving pretty much any benefit meant for the public directly to the corporation instead. This has been happening on repeat since the 80s, really. It's no wonder everything's declined so much. It's no wonder the country is on its knees. It's no wonder the richest 50 families hold more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. But lobbying doesn't just work for policy change. It's the Swiss Army tool of corruption. It can be used in all sorts of ways. In 2020, Robert Jenrick approved a development on the Isle of Dogs by developer Richard Desmond. He had this fast-tracked so it could be done the day before a council charge would have made Desmond pay an extra £40 to £50 million. The following week, Desmond donated £12,000 to the Conservative Party. That one genuinely does feel like open bribery. An Amazon affiliate called Amazon Web Services is contracted by the government to run their computing. It's a pretty big deal that one of the biggest companies in the world runs government data. Ministry of Defence, Department of Work and Pensions, Ministry of Justice, and a few others. Doesn't that level of reliance on such a giant company kind of put the government over a barrel for them? Let's say maybe we finally did consider taxing Amazon just a little bit more, being as they are owned by the third richest man in the world. Amazon now has a massive amount of leverage against the government. It's an unprecedented level of power. Throw lobbying into that mix and you'll have yourself a cocktail of corruption. Shaken, not stirred. Peter Thiel, only 88th richest man in the world, owns a company called Palantir that similarly runs vague computing and data management stuff. This guy is a pretty awful human being.
That we could never win an election on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority. But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics.
You know, I met Epstein a few times as well. He was described as one of the smartest tax people in the world.
Interesting.
And I probably was my moral weakness that I.
Well, how could you have known back then? He had never been arrested.
No, this was 2014. It was post arrest.
They have numerous military contracts, including one for the Israeli occupation forces. They also conveniently run our NHS data, as well as Ministry of Defence data. It's also currently expanding into local councils. But in the Swiss government's review of Palantir, they denied any government contracts with them after a detailed risk analysis, which makes so much sense. Doesn't our relationship with Palantir put them in a highly advantageous position where they could force more government contracts or potentially force government to accept unfavourable deals at our expense? Or, you know, they'll just sell our data on the side and then those ads for boner pills are going to start giving disturbingly accurate depictions of your life and penis. The result of all this corporate lobbying is that some people are more equal than others. These large corporations have more rights than the people. Votes are supposed to be equal in a democracy. Therefore, we are not in a democracy. They call it a plutocracy when the richest people hold a significant influence over government. At the start, I mentioned the differences between public opinion and actual policy change. The biggest disparities are the ones that go against the interests of the wealthy. This is the most obvious way to see that politicians do not follow the will of the people. They follow their lobbyists. Good change for the people, as opposed to lobbyists, is almost impossible in the system as it is. Even looking at the democracy within the governing Labour Party, Labour members overwhelmingly support a wealth tax. Labour members have literally voted to declare the genocide in Gaza to be a genocide. But the government still hasn't accepted that. And if we look at our handy register of financial interests, we can see exactly why. On that note, I just find it ludicrous that we understandably don't let our doctors receive so much as a pen or post-it note from a pharmaceutical rep for fear of undue influence. But then it's just A-OK for West Streeting our health secretary to take £600,000 in donations from private health. To make government actually work for us again, the first step is to drastically legislate against corporate lobbying. There are, however, some difficulties in changing a system that is rigged to need the sign-off of corporate interests before change can happen. You can't just go and ask a dictator nicely if they can restore democracy. The first step is to ensure a government is elected that isn't reliant on corporate backers, so that we can regain real democracy. Perhaps that type of government is the only one that could restructure government to once again work for the people rather than corporations. Interestingly, the Green Party is mostly small donations from individuals without corporate backing. Party members can also vote in conference on policy changes to be enacted in government. It's democratic right the way down. I'm not a stooge though, so do your own research, but for the sole purpose of restoring a democratic governing system, the Green Party is the way to go. Fundamentally, the richest people have a giant pile of money, and by contributing just a small amount from their pile, they can gain influence to ensure that their pile of wealth grows faster than anyone else's. But where is that money coming from? Who is that money coming from? These billionaires don't just magic it up out of thin air. Annual growth rate of the UK economy over the past year is 1.3%. The wealthiest people tend to grow their wealth by at least 5 to 10% each year. So their growing wealth is coming from us. If anything in your body is growing vastly quicker than your body itself, it is a cancer. It will seriously fuck you up if you don't get it sorted. That's why so many of us feel disillusioned from politics. No one pays attention because we feel we don't have a player on the court. It's just some bureaucratic game where balls are being pelted at us on both sides. People feel like it doesn't affect them, like they're not playing the game, but will then in the same breath talk about their bills rising, potholes everywhere, and not getting a doctor's appointment. They're all part of the game. It's all in play. But you've got to play for it. You've got to acknowledge that there are some people who want you to lose so that they can win forever and ever and ever until the end of time. So that they can always be the ones who are the ball pelters. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as they planned. They have meticulously crafted this game to give themselves the ultimate right of decision making over the last 40 years or so. And to be fair, for most of history things used to also function this way, but at least back then, they didn't pretend they weren't the ones who were really in charge. The richest people and the giant corporations have laid it out so that money gets sucked from your pocket onto their ever-growing pile of wealth in the most efficient way possible. So what do we do about it? I don't want to end this on a bad note, but there is one very scary question that remains. How do we regain democracy in a system that is designed to reduce our power and influence? To answer this question, I will quote Caesar. "Apes together strong." That's Caesar from Planet of the Apes, by the way, not from the Roman Empire. But Caesar the ape had a point. If we get together and talk about it and organise, that's how it's always been done in the past. With the original labour movement that improved workers' rights, they got together and talked about what made them mad. They researched together, they planned, they did good things for their communities to gain popular support. Nowadays, the Labour Party are currently in a very scandalous, revealing outfit standing on the corner of Millionaires' Row, offering any multi-millionaire a good time for a good price. They're not the party they used to be. They will do very dirty things to keep the money train rolling. Starving kids, genocide, complicity, kind of dirty. A lot of this happened once Starmer and Morgan McSweeney got their mitts on the handles of power. On a side note, thank God Morgan McSweeney resigned. I just found out about this yesterday, but we'll talk more about him in another episode. So what we're realising here is that to fix it all, we need to go anti-establishment. Reform or anti-establishment, right? Well, I'm afraid to say they're about as corporate as it gets. 6 out of 8 of their MPs were educated privately, and that's unheard of. They're also not even a political party really, they're a registered business. They don't even have members, they have supporters. Also, they have giant donations from corporations. £2.3 million from oil and gas interests from 2020 to 2024. More recently, £9 million from an aviation fuel cryptocurrency billionaire, which is the largest single donation in British politics. Along with those, we have donations from a CEO, a famous actress, singer and model, no, not Farage, an aristocratic socialite who once dated King Charles, whose son is an aide to the party after having been convicted and sentenced for money laundering, a hedge fund boss, another businessman with his own spot on the Sunday Times rich list, an energy executive, and their party advisor was a close personal friend of Jeffrey Epstein. I'll leave it there because I think my point is clear, but please know I could keep going. And you may be surprised to see how many reform donations are also from former Tory donors. Currently, the Green Party is the most similar in funding structure to the original Labour Party. Not paid off by corporate interest, predominantly funded through member donations. It's like a people's union for anyone that's had enough of the status quo. Most local Green parties are good at having monthly meetings. If you've got some kind of specific skill or knowledge or even just a passion but don't know where to start, I'd recommend going to your local meetings just to see what they're about. They have varying age groups and are mostly all planning how to absolutely hand it to the Labour Party in the May elections to give them an indication of how badly they fucked it. To give them an indication that they need to stop listening to these corporate lobbyists in their ears. These devils on their shoulders telling them to take candy from the babies instead of the gluttonous candy barons with more candy than their whole family can consume in their entire lives. When you were a kid, if you're anything like I was, you probably argue with your parents about how you saw a kid in your class who got to have chocolate spread sandwiches for lunch. Then they told you you're not allowed to have that because it's unhealthy. And then you said, well, Jake, who has the sandwiches, seems to be reasonably healthy. But then your parents said you still can't have them in your lunch. And you said, but that's not fair. And then they said, well, life's not fair. Life's not fair. Over the years, I've felt that become truer and truer. Michael Bloomberg, the American 100 billionaire, can get a meeting with the head honchos of Labour and lucratively persuade key policy changes. Meanwhile, your local Labour MP responds to your emails via ChatGPT, if at all. That's not fair. Life's not fair. But maybe we can make it fairer? Just because something is currently the case doesn't mean that it has to be the case. But it can only be changed if enough people get on board, and the only people around I'm seeing that are actually aware of this issue at all are the Green Party, so give them a look. See what you make of them. But I'm afraid that's all we have time for in this one, folks. So I'll see you in the next one. I've left a link in the description for the MP's Register of Financial Interests as well as the Electoral Commission, which are often the best ways to see who's really controlling our politics. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I've been working on setting this whole thing up over 6 months, so I'd really appreciate any support, and if you've got any feedback or anything you learned, be sure to leave a comment below. But for now, I've been a reporter, and this has been Pathos Politics. I'll see you next time. Whoop whoop, episode 1 done. Whoop whoop. Only took me bloody 53 minutes. Fucking hell.